Evolution is a fact. Generally, when this is formatted as an objection to Christianity, the first question that is preferably responded to is, what kind of evolution do you mean? Because, pun intended, the theory continues to evolve and change its form to this day, and we can point out all of the transitional theories that have taken place throughout the ages. It's been going on for millions of years, if you want to use the jargon. Now, going into the problems, once again, microevolution is something that no Christian, informed at least, would dispute, because it's merely referring to adaptations within a species. If an animal is in a colder climate, they are capable of introducing new genetic features that allow them to be more suitable for said climates. We can observe this not just through the fossil record, but through animals adapting to their environments today. When we look at the various types of dogs, we see animals more suited for hunting in the British Isles, like the dachshund, or animals more suited for the cold mountainous climates, like the husky, and on it goes. But across the ages and within these environments, we still see dogs, and that is the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. Macroevolution is a theory, and oddly enough referred to as such without any evidence, because in order for it to be established, we don't just need demonstrations of the fact that animals have transitioned from one into the other over trillions of years, which is impossible to observe even from the fossil record, but even more importantly, if we're to demonstrate this sort of transitional form, that this was the foundation of our universe, it no more dismisses Christianity, even if we admit that it's true, than if we discover the function of the internal combustion engine and find out there was no such thing as Henry Ford. John Lennox, of course, was the one who made this observation. When we observe a creation that works, we imply there was a creator that made it so it would work. This is what's known as the teleological argument, the argument for fine-tuning. If you say that it came into existence for no reason or purpose, then you have to ask, why is it that there is such a fine reason behind the way these things function and a purpose to which they fulfill? The puddle argument, of course, begs the question, because when you argue from your conclusion that the environment that the water is fitting into suits itself just like we do today, you have to assume your conclusion without evidence, not establish it. It may make it sound like it's a better explanation, but once again, we're back to the first question. Where are the transitional species? We haven't found one. And also to note that as well, the claim that creatures from one species could transition to the other requires, and I use this term intentionally, irreducibly complex systems like feathers, scales, and other things that would need to have essentially been taken for granted over these very long periods of time that would not only allow these species to survive, but thrive and become a dominant species to introduce a new one. If we're going to assume that this happened without evidence, if we're going to say, oh, there's this little strain of an outline across a skeleton, well, that's obviously a proto-feather, and this proves a transition from a reptile to a bird. That is making more leaps than me finding wood buried in my backyard and concluding it was part of Noah's Ark. At least in the case of Noah's Ark, I can test and confirm that they were both made of gopher wood. But here's the point. If I'm going to make a claim historically, I need historical evidence. And that is true as well for scientific systems. If I assume that things have always functioned the same way, I should expect to see the same things today. But what do we see today? Plenty of evidence of microevolution, but no evidence of macroevolution. No matter how much they torture, spin, and mutilate the genome of a fruit fly, it still remains a fruit fly. And as a result of those mutations introduced to it, they are rarely, if not always, put in a worse state, not a better one. So here are the facts on the table. What's referred to as the Cambrian explosion, the introduction in the fossil strata of all of these various forms of early types of creatures, all came into basically existence at one particular point with a wide diversity between them. Note that in the earliest stages we found things like, I can't pronounce the three-syllable words, but these sea-dwelling or crustacean-like creatures were all coming into existence together and appearing on the world scene without any singular origin between them. All of the systems that they had were all diverse. They were all introducing these types of creatures, not all coming from one creature and then spreading out into a wide diversity. Once again, no evidence of transitional species. They lived and died at the same time as other separate species from themselves, with no evidence of any living creatures before them. Second, and this has already been said, but it will be restated, no matter how a dog, a cat, or a fruit fly adapts to their environment, through intelligent design or otherwise, will always remain a dog, a cat, or a fruit fly. Mutations never created separate species from the rest. If nothing else, they have only harmed them. A perfect example is in adapting to darker environments, some animals mutate to basically adjust to the no longer need for processing light, and they end up blind. Now, this may introduce a new type of creature that doesn't see, but the last time I checked, blindness was a handicap, not an advantage. If they were reintroduced into a new environment, they would die off also immediately. And then noting these mutations, they would only be suited for that said environment, but still, once again, only proving microevolution, not macro. You don't have a new type of creature just because it can't see. Also note that if it starts behaving like other creatures, say for instance its fins start to resemble appendages and hands rather than fins meant for sea travel, that just proves that it is a fish still capable of functioning in closer quarters and is using the things that have been put into it to adapt to its environment. That shows a smart creator, not a purposeless existence adapting one to another. Even if I assume everything that macroevolution implies, which theistic evolutionists do, I'm not one of them, but they would say this only proves that the intelligent designer made sure that a system was put in place where species could survive. If we're going to say that the genetic structure of living creatures and the incredible complexity thereof took place by chance, let alone was preserved to the point where it, through no intelligence or purpose behind it, was going to do so, you're playing with odds that are so astronomical that they pass the realm of absurd yesterday. The universe began to exist according to their numbers a number of seconds ago, and if we were to put a decimal point behind it, the odds, or rather a fraction and a 1 over it, the chances and odds aren't even close to that kind of number. Now, if I have fewer reasons to trust your system, I am less willing to refer to it as a theory. The only reason why evolution is a fact is used as an objection to Christianity in the first place isn't because people have read Darwin's work, isn't because people have found evidence of transitional species or the purpose and reason thereof. It isn't because they're biology experts. It isn't because they have gone into these systems and concluded there is no God. They found a system that could theoretically explain away the need for a creator that made us all with intention and purpose. They don't want to follow his design, but they do want to appreciate the life that they have, so they needed a system that explains both and allows them the excuse of dismissing its origin and thus their obligation to it. If I was created for a reason, and note I'm going off on this a little bit, but if I was created for a reason, then my best life would be suiting that reason. If I was created for no reason, then I serve no purpose and can make it up as I go. The only reason macroevolution has become so popular isn't because there's evidence for it. It's because it gives people the possible leeway of dismissing a creator and thus accountability to him. The only problem is when even people admit too much that the evidence would suggest, then they end up acknowledging the very same point that we do. Now, understand, my fellow Christians here, if you believe in macroevolution, I do not consider you a heretic. I would say that you are mishandling certain portions of Scripture and once again are still accountable to the lack of evidence to support it. I would also heavily emphasize the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. But when it ultimately comes down to it, this is not an objection to Christianity. It only further demonstrates on either end of the spectrum the fine-tuning argument, which even atheists like Christopher Hitchens admitted was a very difficult persuasion of Christianity's truth that he had to get over. And instead of course, addressing it, he just dismissed it, and unfortunately did so until the time of his death. But when it comes to those who are concerned about this issue, remember those three main facts. There's a difference between micro and macroevolution. There is a difference between transitional species and adaptations within a species. No matter how many articles you read as proof of evolution that a dog started acting like something else, it's still a dog. In the same way that if I started acting like a cat, you wouldn't say I'm evolving into a cat, you'd put me in a nut house. So this is the point. If the Cambrian explosion shows us that life was introduced at a particular point with differences in the species within them, and that is still reflected by the world we see today, we should conclude, based on the evidence, that we have been made with a purpose. And if you want to go into more interesting details about perhaps the absurdity of the accidental introduction of our genetic code and structure, I recommend Norman Geisler and Frank Turk's book, I Do Not Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, where they go into the DNA molecule and all of the factors involved in that alone. The odds of it coming into chance, or at least one of the proteins that compose it coming into existence by chance, are the equivalent of a printing press exploding and producing 10,000 encyclopedias. And that's just a short paraphrase. But when it ultimately comes down to it as well, Darwin's Doubt is also a great resource. I would also recommend the book Already Gone by Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis, and their resources and articles that can present both sides of the argument and make sure that you're informed. But when it comes to this issue of evolution being a fact, again, clarify what they mean by evolution, clarify that that only proves fine-tuning, the teleological argument, and I encourage you to look up the arguments for that as well. When it ultimately comes down to it, this is no objection to Christianity, it's a dismissal of it based on something that actually admits components that are fundamental for Christianity being true, or at least some sort of religion. We still have a designer, that's why we see design. Thank you for your time, and if you have any sincere questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll look forward to talking more about this with you next time. And in moving on from this topic, we'll be addressing more of these objections very soon. And until then, God bless you.